So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to discuss this issue of abrogation. Now, a little bit of background on abrogation. I think, and I have been briefing this since maybe 2005, that it's the most important concept in Islamic law to get one's hands around from the perspective of analyzing groups like Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? Why? Because this is the roadmap they use. The roadmap they use, is based on this concept of abrogation. So, I would like to point out that I've been briefing this since 2005. I think it was 2007, I was banned from briefing it at a national counterterrorism briefing, to which former head of the CIA came out and publicly said that was an outrage. Okay? I think it was 2008 maybe. Okay? But why do I want to point this out? Because if you understand the nexus between Muslim Brotherhood ideology and the Islamic law of abrogation, you can predict what they're going to do. And we have been doing it over and over and over again. We have nothing that we've had to reclama. We've had nothing we've had to take back. And by the time we get done with this discussion of abrogation, you will understand that choosing not to know this so as not to offend other people and branding this, what was the word? Warped, okay, has caused Americans to die in America, okay? I think not knowing this is malpractice. Now, you will hear people say, oh, those guys are talking about this Islamic concept of abrogation, and of course most Muslims don't even know about it. Guess what? Most Americans don't know res ipsa loquitur, but it's a part of the U.S. legal system that can touch them whether they ever heard of it, okay? I don't have to prove that. I don't have to go up to Private Snuffy Smith and say, Private Snuffy Smith, what article of the Constitution caused you to join the Army? He might look at me and say, what are you talking about? But guess what? PFC Snuffy Smith, or Sergeant Snuffy Smith, he exists in that uniform because the Constitution created that reality, and he will fight for it whether he ever read it. In the same instance, I don't have to prove that this is ubiquitously known in the Muslim population. I just have to prove that it's doctrine. And all I have to do from that point is show that it is the baseline on which the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and every other radical group orients their strategic thinking on. And I will prove that as a matter of fact. In fact, even if you could prove abrogation was wrong, I could still prove that they think it's true and they orient on it. So not knowing this is malpractice. So, as you go and talk to your cultural experts and moderates and say, well, we don't believe in that, and you shouldn't listen to it, just come to us, and we'll tell you what you're allowed to know. And I'll argue, well, this is what they believe. I'm going to tell you, you got to make a choice. One's true or the other's true. And one's true to the exclusion of the other. Now, as you decide which side you're going to come down on, all I'm going to ask is, on what factual basis are you making that decision? On what professional basis are you going to come down one way or the other? Okay? Because I will argue the facts only cut one way. In fact, in the entire war on terror, they've always only cut one way. Okay? So, does abrogation exist? Well, let's just take a look at it. People will say, this is Steve Coughlin's interpretation of Islam. As you've seen so far, if it's an element of Islam, I never say it, I read it. And I read it out of an authoritative book, a source that's authoritative. Okay? So, let's take a look at Islamic jurisprudence, written by Imran Hassan Khan Naizi, a different book. Abrogation defined. What does he say? The law was laid down in the period of the Prophet, gradually and in stages. The aim was to bring a society steeped in morality to observe the highest standards of morality. This could not be done abruptly. It was done in stages, and doing so necessitated repeal and abrogation of certain laws. So, what is he saying? Who laid down the law in the period of the Prophet? Who was it? Who did it? Allah, when he revealed his word. And how did he do it? Gradually and in stages. In fact, what, a 22-year period of time? Okay? So, what's it saying the next? Steeped in morality? I think that the Muslim Brotherhood would fairly say the Arabs were so immoral at the time, in a complete state of jahiliyyah, that Allah decided to bring them along slowly. Didn't want to create shock. So it was done slowly. It was done in stages. So what would happen is when the message got to a certain stage and the population was ready, the message could be changed to the higher message because they were ready for it. But the second they went to that higher mission, they then could repeal and abrogate the earlier law. Okay? And they would keep progressively doing that until they came to the end state of Islam over the 22-year period. So, what is abrogation saying? Abrogation is saying that the things that were revealed last in the Quran chronologically overrule or control the things that were said earlier. So, here you have it. You have your moderate friend, and he says, I hear you've been talking to some of these people, and they're talking about this concept of abrogation. He says, you, infidels, must read from the entire body of the Quran to get the true meaning. Those terrorists are cherry-picking. Well, you see, if I'm right, so are the moderates in that statement. Think about that. Those moderates are cherry-picking. And what would they be cherry-picking? Well, if they're right, they'd be cherry-picking the verses of the Quran that came last. But what does it mean that our friends are telling us to read the entire body of the Quran? Wow, they're telling us that these other guys are cherry-picking. Because they're cherry-picking the end of the Quran, that would conform to this. Would it not? So it would seem, of course, you heard him say that, and your impression was they're radicals and that they're cherry-picking. Why would we listen to that? But if you think about what was said was correct. Interesting, isn't it? So, didn't think about that, did you? So, let's take a look at this book, Milestones. But before I go into Milestones, I'll back that up a second. Before I go into Milestones, what happened? Muslim Brotherhood forms in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna. They're going around trying to devise their strategy of what they want to do. They're Salafi, so they want to bring back Islam to its purest form. And, Hassan al-Banna, he formulated this strategy. I don't want to give Sayyid Qutb full credit, but we could say that Sayyid Qutb's writings in the late 50s, early 60s operationalized this whole idea. What did he say? How do we bring Islam back today to this generation as they have fallen into a complete state of disbelief? They've fallen into a complete state of jahiliyyah. And Qutb thought, and he thought, and he thought. Actually, I think it was pretty clear to him. He says, I know what we will do. We will bring Islam back to this generation the same way it was brought back to the first generation, the best generation, the Salaf. Okay? What's he saying? We will reintroduce Islam today, and we will mark the milestones based on the first generation of revelation. And when we see that this generation has gotten to a point that matches the point in the first generation where they could change the stage, move up, we will mark that milestone and advance as well. So, the name of the book is Milestones, Milestones Along the Road, also translated as Signpost Along the Road. So, there it is. So, if what I'm saying is true, and it is, there is no understanding Muslim Brotherhood and Salafi doctrine ranging from the Muslim Brotherhood to Al-Qaeda, okay, without understanding this milestones process. And there's no understanding the milestones process unless you understand it's a direct inject into Islamic law through the concept, legal doctrine of abrogation. And that's true even if you do not believe in abrogation yourself, because they do. Let's see. What did Sayyid Qutb say? Thus God Most High imparted it to them in gradual manner to be read at intervals, referring to the first generation. And he quotes Quran verse 17:106. We'll read 17:106 later. He goes on and he says, the Quran did not come down all at once. Rather, it came down according to the needs of the Islamic society and facing new problems. Where do you think I got this document? Right here. The Quran was sent down in parts over 23 years according to events and circumstances. And look at that. It's also quoting Quran verse 17:106. Where did I get this? Well, we'll take a look in a second. There is no other way but gradual action, preparing the people's souls and setting an example so that faith will enter their hearts. Gradual action does not impose Islam at once, but rather step by step in order to facilitate understanding, studying, acceptance, and submission. The Prophet, peace be on him, acted in a gradual manner by first preparing the people, then preparing the family, then society and the state. So where did I get this? Guess what? I got this out of a Islam Online article, the 11th of June, 2011, excuse me. So, as they are celebrating their success and looking to take power last year, June a year ago, they're saying the same thing Sayyid Qutb said. Do you see that? And there's the article heading right there. There's the entire article. So, let me put a nice little star on this for you. At the Muslim Brotherhood's 5th conference, the movement's founder, Imam Hassan al-Banna, spoke about gradual action and reliance on education and defined the stages of implementing the Sharia. Al-Banna said, "Listen to what I say in a loud and resounding voice. This way of yours, whose phases are written and whose boundaries are defined, written in the Quran, defined by Islamic law." Okay? Are defined is long, but there is no alternate way. I am not with those who want to pick the fruit before it has ripened. So, gradual action does not impose Islam at once, but rather step by step. That's exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing right now. And it's exactly what they were doing when we first warned that they were starting to do this in October 2010. That's October, November, January, February. 3 months before Tahrir Square in the Arab Spring, we were saying, watch out. They've said the magic words and are going to take power. Among the places I briefed at are multiple U.S. military schools, and I do believe the FBI Washington field office. Warned with precision. So, article on the Muslim Brotherhood website, Implement Sharia in Phases. Complete continuity in this message from beginning. You see, the Quran did not come down all at once, that's the milestones, to 2011. I think I put a little update in there from beginning to the end and in between. Here we have the explanatory memorandum, understanding the historical stages in which the Islamic Ikhwani activism went through in this country, and talking about the stages. Okay, we'll skip past that one because it's a little complicated. And here we have Tariq Ramadan, the grandson of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. This is the path of wisdom that revelation itself has taught us during the 23 years of successive revelation. Many prohibitions and obligations were revealed step by step in order to both make the new ruling easily attainable and to uplift Muslim hearts. And here we have another quote from Hassan al-Banna, from Brother Tariq. Hassan al-Banna in 1940, he quotes his father, "What I mean by holy war, jihad, is the duty that must be obeyed until the day of resurrection, and which God's messenger sets down in these words." This is, I do believe, Tariq Ramadan quoting his grandfather, Hassan al-Banna. The first stage in the sacred war is to expel evil from one's heart. The highest stage is armed combat in the service of God. Intermediate stages are waging war with one's voice, one's pen, one's hands, and by words of truth addressed to unjust authorities. Are you starting to see a common message here and a common orientation? Now, let's go back to that book by this man, Louis Safi. Okay, I always like to include the little sales tag so people can see where I bought these books. This was at the Halal Books out in Northern Virginia. And what does he say in that book, Peace and the Limits of War? Well, let's see. Thus, it is up to the Muslim leadership to assess the situation and weigh the circumstances as well as the capacity of the Muslim community before deciding the appropriate type of jihad. At one stage, Muslims may find that jihad through persuasion or peaceful resistance is the best and most effective method to achieve just peace. That's the Meccan period, the period when things were peaceful. At another stage, fortifications and defensive tactics. And yet, at a third stage, Muslim leadership may decide that all-out war is the most appropriate measure to bring about a just peace. Do you see that? The stages, first you're very nice and peaceful, then you kind of become defensive, and then when the opportunity comes, you attack. Progressive revelation, the rule of abrogation, the milestones process. By the way, this man was briefing U.S. troops at Fort Hood after the Fort Hood event. Okay? And I will tell you, you see, translated from English to English, this is what that says. So when people say they didn't know this about him, it means that they never looked. Okay? So here we have the current head, the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, body. The Muslim nation has the means to bring about improvement and change. It knows the way, the methods, and the road signs, and is a practical role model and Allah's messenger, the Prophet Muhammad, who clarified how to implement the values of the Quran and the Sunnah in every time and every place. Now, he said this in 2010, September. I said October earlier because that's when we heard about it. This is when he was basically he said, it's time to go from the Meccan to the Medinan phase. Okay? And we provided warning about that. So complete continuity from beginning to the end and in between. Complete continuity, returning to 1966. It's always about marking the milestones as pegged to the law of abrogation. What did Sayyid Qutb say? The milestones will necessarily be determined by the light of the first source of this faith, the Holy Quran, and from its basic teachings, and from the concept which it created in the minds of the first group of Muslims. Only in light of this explanation can we understand those verses of the Holy Quran which are concerned with the various stages of this movement. In reading these verses, we should always keep in mind that one of their meanings is related to the particular stages of the development of Islam today. So, there is no understanding the Muslim Brotherhood if you don't understand this, which is why we keep reverting back to democracy and Arab Spring, when in fact this is what's been guiding them from the very beginning, and they said so. And we can read it. So not knowing this is going to precipitate disaster in our foreign policy sphere. Okay? So, I think the Sharia should be implemented gradually. This article says from memory. This is Yusuf Kawadari. I think that in the first 5 years there should be no chopping off of hands. The body, what does he say? The Supreme Guide, the Muslim Brotherhood General Guide, our ultimate goal, establishing a global Islamic caliphate, can only be achieved gradually and without coercion. What are they going to do? They're going to slowly move to power, and they're going to slowly prepare their message so that you are always going to be just a little bit behind the power curve, okay, because you refuse to understand that everything they're saying is pegged to the Milestones process, which is a direct inject into Islamic law through the rule of abrogation. So, let's take a look. Here's Ayman Zawahiri. So remember, I told you, it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood who buys into this. This is Ayman Zawahiri in his own words. And what does he say under the Knights Under the Banner? Sayyid Qutb's call for loyalty to God's oneness and to acknowledge God's sole authority and sovereignty was the spark that ignited the entire Islamic revolution against the enemies of Islam. When they talk to each other, they're talking the rules of abrogation. So when you hear the Al-Qaeda say, hey, you guys are in the Meccan stage, you better get to Medina, what they're telling them to do is go to war. And you know what? That's exactly what happened in summer 2010 when Al-Qaeda told groups like the Muslim Brotherhood to get with the program. So here we have it. Let's take a look at what the basis for this concept of abrogation is, the Quranic one. Now, remember I was telling you earlier that not knowing this is getting people dead, and that I've been briefing this brief since about 2003 with some minor modifications. You've seen some updates to account for the Arab Spring, and you'll see some new updates here that we're putting in 2000, I do believe, 9. Okay? Nothing's changed. Okay? I want you to understand that because warning about this was provided and briefed in the Pentagon at least 100 times. So, what does the Quran say? That verse 17:106? Remember, if it's in the Quran, it is the uncreated word of Allah. And unless it was overruled by a later statement in the Quran, it is binding. It is a Quran which we have divided into parts from time to time in order that thou mightest recite it to men at intervals. We have revealed it in stages. Who has revealed it in stages? Allah. What does the commentator say? All revelation is progressive. You say, I don't believe that. Well, that's what it says. And even if you think that commentary is wrong, it's a commentary in the most read, translated book of Islamic law out there, the Holy Quran, the meaning of the Holy Quran. So, who said this? Well, I'd like to point out that I caught a copy of Major Hassan's presentations. his presentations that he was given to fellow officers at Walter Reed, I do believe, as well as other military audiences, I'm told as many as 20 or 22 times. Okay? What did he say in his briefing? Among the reasons he is to become a jihadi, his brief was about declaring that he was becoming a jihadi, was because of progressive revelation, the rule of abrogation. You see, those people at Fort Hood are dead because he felt that the rule of abrogation was driving him to his position. And that's true even if he was wrong about abrogation. So what else is wrong? You not knowing about abrogation. Okay, why? Because it drives the decision-making notwithstanding its correctness. But as you're trying to work out why it's not correct in your mind, ask yourself, why are you fighting it? I mean, why are you fighting it if you're not doing a factual analysis? And if you're not doing a factual analysis, why aren't you? So, here we have it. A real doctrine that reason would reveal. So, let's take a look at a couple more quotes from the Quran. When we substitute one revelation for another, and Allah knows best what He reveals in stages, they say thou art but a forger, but most of them understand not. That's Quran verse 16:106. What's going on here? Muhammad had a new revelation, and somebody in the crowd said, Muhammad, that is contradicting what you said earlier. You're making this up. And Muhammad had a revelation that said, wait a second here. When we, the royal we, Allah, substitute one revelation for another, and Allah knows best what He's revealing in stages, how dare you call Muhammad a forger? You don't understand. So this is an actual blowback to some of Muhammad's contemporaries. Okay? So, and the commentator says progressive revelation. I think the most important verse, is the one here, Quran verse 2:106. None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that Allah hath power over all things? So, who are you going to believe? The moderates who say there's no such thing as abrogation, or the radicals who are cherry picking? Let me say this a different way. Who are you going to believe? Allah, who said there's such a thing as abrogation, or your moderate friends? Okay? So, take a look. Major Hassan, the exact 2 slides that I had been briefing years before he put his brief together. None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten when we substitute one revelation for another. So, I had this argument down exactly correct. Exactly correct. And warning was provided. Okay? This idea that that's workplace violence is an offense. But you know what? If you're not allowed to actually identify the enemy, you can never get to his actual threat drivers, and you're left with that kind of silly explanation that the American public will lose confidence in our leadership for even saying. So, the literal meaning of nasq is the canceling or transferring. In its technical sense, it is used to mean the lifting of a legal rule through a legal evidence of a later date. The abrogating text or evidence is called the nasikh, while the repealed rule is called the mansukh. Okay, just to give you some technical information. What did Major Hassan say? In Mecca, Muslims were not permitted to defend themselves or to fight. Their only job was to deliver the message. Emigration to Medina, self-defense was allowed. Then offensive fighting was allowed. Later verses abrogated former peaceful verses that no longer applied. Indeed, at one point, the Islamic Empire spanned from Morocco to China. Okay? So, do the people who kill Americans believe in the concept of abrogation? The answer is yes. How do we know? We're proving it right here. But remember, I was showing the argument before the act. So, this is what the Quran looks like when it's arranged chronologically, early, middle, and late Meccan, and then the Medinan period. Now let me do some due diligence here. There is genuine disagreement about the specific ordering. I picked one and I went with it. But, you know, there are bona fide Islamic legal scholars who could give you at least 2 other variants to this one. So if someone gets up and says, I don't agree with that order, it's all wrong, okay, fine. Okay? What's important? The Muslim calendar starts AH, after Hijrah, after they came to Medina. The Islamic calendar does not start with the beginning of Mecca, but Medina. As a practical matter, that's when Islamic law starts, the Medinan period. Okay? What are we saying here? anything said in the Medinan period controls or overrules anything that was said earlier. What else are we saying? Anything revealed later in the Medinan period controls or overrules what was said earlier. Now, some people will say, some people have said that 110 is the last surah, some have said 9 is the last surah. What's important to remember is there's pretty much universal agreement that Surah 2 is the first of the Medinan period, 3 came after 2, 9 is the last to talk about jihad, and 5 is the last to talk about relations with non-Muslims. So given that 9 and 5 are the final word, that 3 came after 2, you have the relative order for what we're concerned with. Okay? Now, we're concerned with. What we're going to show is that there's Islamic law that makes it clear that there's a basis for believing that Muslims who believe in abrogation believe they're reading Islamic law when they believe there's a concept called abrogation. So, here, it does say in Quran verse 256, let there be no compulsion in religion. The problem is in Surah 3, we have in 385, whoever seeks religion other than Islam will never have it accepted of him, and he will be of those who have truly failed in the hereafter. So if this abrogation concept is accurate, 385 overruled 256. And then finally, the last surah to speak about relations with non-Muslims, Surah verse 551, O you who believe, take not the Jews and Christians for your friends and protectors. They are but friends and protectors to each other, and he amongst you that turns to them for friendship is of them. Verily Allah guideth not the unjust. Who are the unjust besides the Christians and the Jews? The Muslims who follow them. Who said so? Allah. Okay? So, what did Major Hassan say? He said 493, 1733. Now, I want to take a little stop here. What do you think those numbers are? They're verses to the Quran. And here's how I want you to think about how maybe command and control works in the Islamic parlance. Okay? Think about it like you're watching an NFL football game and the quarterback comes up to the front line. He sees the blitz. So he has to call an audible. And he'll say, 493, 1733, hut, hut. He goes back. Lo and behold, the receivers that were going to go long are now blocking. The running back was going to block is now going to get the ball. He runs up the middle, gains 15 yards for the first down. How did they know that the number 493, 1733 was to tell them something different? It's because they're all playing from the same game book, right? They're trained on the same game book. And being trained on the same game book, they know when they hear an audible, all they had to hear were the numbers. I would like to suggest that if this concept of abrogation is grounded in Islamic law, where there's an overarching hierarchy of the Quran organized by the concept of abrogation, where there's supporting hadith that support it, and then narratives underneath it to say what happened, you can construct an entire operational plan based on just throwing numbers out from the Quran, and you will have every mosque in the world who hears it have to make a decision. Now, they could hear it and decide, we don't agree with Al-Qaeda, they're radicals, they're crazy, we ain't going to do it. And then you might hear some other mosques say, well, we might agree, but what can we do? But you will always run into the problem that you might run into a mosque here that agrees, or an individual over there who agrees. Guess what? There's a sense in which if you hear a command that you agree with in Islamic law, you become somewhat compelled to act. Okay? That would explain the lone wolf terrorists. If you take a look at FBI Director Mueller's testimony a week ago, he said they claimed affiliation with Al-Qaeda, but there's no links to them. I will say the link is that they claimed affiliation. And the response will be, but Steve, there's no evidence that he was ever actually involved with them. Well, I don't know. The guy at Dar al-Hijra Mosque, I mean, that is where al-Waqi was. But let's just say there was no evidence. Because you can't actually show there was an association. What do we have then? Well, I will argue that despite the fact that from an evidentiary standard, you might not be able to prove that in the court of law, his status as an Al-Qaeda operative is fixed by virtue of the fact that he heard it, he agreed, and he acted. And that is all that is sufficient. So the very follow-on, there's no evidence he belonged to Al-Qaeda, is irrelevant to the fact that he stated his affiliation to it, and that is sufficient. And yes, that creates a problem. Just look at Major Hassan. Just look at the DC sniper. Okay, just look at any number of people. Where, by the way, they flat out tell us that that's why they acted. So it's not a mystery. There's just censoring it in the normal press. So we don't hear about it. So what does 493 say? Because I think this tells you why Major Hassan was declaring that he was going to become a jihadi. 493 says, whoever kills a believer intentionally, his punishment is hell. He shall abide in it, and Allah will send his wrath on him and curse him and prepare for him a painful chastisement. 1733, and do not kill anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden except for a just cause. I think what happened is Major Hassan was at Walter Reed. He was getting ready to break from his training. He's a full-blown psychiatrist. He's done his, what's it called? Residency. And so he's going to be deployed, and he's seeing that he's going to be deployed to the Middle East, Afghanistan, or maybe Iraq. He realizes, I might be put in a situation where I'll have to kill someone who Allah has forbidden from killing except for a just cause. And I know that whoever kills a believer intentionally, his punishment is hell. Now, look at that. If you go get a Quran, and it actually says that in the Quran, and it most certainly does, what Major Hassan is wrestling with is the fact that he may have to go and find himself a situation where he would have to kill a Muslim without cause. Now, that raises the question, what is cause? And it's actually much more easier to answer than you might think. But, so what is he saying? Because I would have to be in that status, I am now announcing in this briefing I'm giving to all my fellow officers that if I'm deployed, I will kill. Well, lo and behold, he didn't get sent down there. He got sent to Fort Hood. He was what, about 10 days away from what? Being deployed. Okay? And that's when he struck. So he kept true to his word, to include the fact that he only acted when the jihad requirement became real for him, because the alternative was his immortal soul. So, let's take a look. What does the Tasfir say about what one of those verses means? We could do both, but we're on a short timeline here. Let's take a look at 1733. And do not kill anyone whose killing Allah has forbidden except for a just cause. Here's the explanation for it. Prohibition of unlawful killing. Allah forbids killing with no legitimate reason. It was reported in 2 sahihs, 2 hadith whose status has already been determined as authoritative in Islamic law. Okay, there's a better explanation, but for right now, that will work. From the Messenger of Allah, meaning there were 2 hadith from the Prophet Muhammad. And what were they? The blood of a Muslim who bears witness to La ilaha illallah, or there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, okay, is not permissible to be shed except for 3 cases. 1, a soul for a soul, a Muslim who kills a fellow Muslim who's innocent. 2, an adulterer who is married. Or 3, a person who leaves his religion and deserts the jama'ah. Okay? So, what is Major Hassan saying? If I go over there and I kill a Muslim, and it's not because he murdered an innocent Muslim, it's not because he's an adulterer, and it's not because he's apostatized, I am killing without right. And I am in deep trouble. And that is the killing without right. So, if the world, the other Sahih, if the world were to be destroyed, it would be of less importance to Allah than the killing of a Muslim. By the way, do you see how easy it is to pull this information out? Really easy. You just have to make a decision to look. Okay? I believe that's exactly what he meant, and that's why he said it. And I believe it was clear. Okay? So that the fact that people do not find it clear is a monument to the success in a hostile information campaign to get people not to look at what they had a duty to know. So, do non-Muslims qualify for forbidden killing except for a just cause? Let's take a look at Book O Justice. At the very beginning, retaliation, the law of retaliation, specifically those not subject to retaliation in section 01.2. What does it say? The following are not subject to retaliation. 1, a Muslim for killing a non-Muslim. They may be guilty of a crime, but it would not be murder in the sense that killing a Muslim without right would be. Okay? But while we're here, let's take a look at another one. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. A father or mother for killing their offspring. or their offspring's offspring. What's that? It's honor killing. Okay? Oh, Steve, that's nothing to do with Islam. That's a sociological thing that we're not going to, well, we can't overburden people with these kind of things. If I can show that it's listed in Islamic law, I can show you that Islamic law has ruled on it, and that's a fact. And you're wrong if you disagree. Okay? So, what do we have here? Let's take a look. We're still on abrogation because I don't want people to think I just pulled these verses out of my you-know-what for fun. The abrogation of previously revealed religions, W4.3. What does it say? By him in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, any person of this community, any Jew or any Christian who hears of me and dies without believing in what I have been sent with will be an inhabitant of hell. Who am I quoting? Muhammad. Where? In rigorously authenticated Sahih Hadith, a saying of the Prophet that has been adjudicated as authoritative by the second most authoritative Hadith scholar, a man named Muslim. So what do we have here? We have authoritative Islamic law citing authoritative sayings of the Prophet Muhammad to say the verse 385 of the Quran is valid. Are you starting to see that as we look at the balancing of facts, oh, Steve, it's so tightly weighted. It's not weighted. There's no tight weighting here. There's no balance here. Okay? When we look at the authoritative text, it is kicking to one side. So, on what factual basis, professionally, the duty to know, are you going to say this is not true? Because I'm arguing a burden of proof is being met here. Okay? So, previously revealed religions. Now, here's an example of that same book, Reliance of the Traveler, relying on Ibn Kathir, the person whose task fear it was. And this is important because he's going to explain verse 262 of the Quran, because this sounds like a moderate and open-minded verse to which you will see all the time. Surely those who believe, those of Jewry, the Christians and the Sabians, whoever has faith in Allah and the last day and works righteousness, their wage awaits them with their Lord, and no fear shall be upon them, and neither shall they sorrow. Well, how? Okay, it's been abrogated, but how do they explain this? Okay, abrogation of previously revealed religions. That's the section we're under. Well, it tells us right here. The faith of the Jews was that whoever adhered to the Torah and Sunnah of Moses, in Islamic parlance, was a Muslim prophet. Okay? Until the coming of Jesus. Jesus, in Islamic parlance, is a Muslim prophet. Okay? Period. Okay? Do not be going into the Talmud and the Old Testament for Moses. Do not be going into the New Testament for Jesus when you're analyzing Islam. If you do, you're wrong. Okay? The faith of the Jews is that whoever adhered to the Torah and Sunnah of Moses until the coming of Jesus. When Jesus came, whoever held fast to the Torah and Sunnah of Moses without giving them up and following Jesus was lost. The faith of the Christians was that whoever adhered to the evangel and precepts of Jesus, their faith was valid and acceptable until the coming of Muhammad. Allah bless them and give them peace. Those of them who did not follow Muhammad and give up the Sunnah of Jesus and the evangel were lost. Why? 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 Well, it tells us why. The foregoing is not contradicted by the hadith revealing that the verse, surely those who believe, because it was followed by Allah revealing, whoever seeks a religion other than Islam will never have it accepted of him. It was abrogated. Okay? How many examples would I have to provide here in what is understood in the Islamic community as authoritative for you to decide that maybe you at least have to allocate some analytical processes to the fact that the enemy stated threat doctrine is there and may be right. Okay? So, why do I like this example? Because I was giving this example for years. I first started giving this example in 2005. Major Hassan started giving it in 2009. 262? No. 385. That's what's in place here. So, you can't see here, but this is bolder than that. One's more bold. So what is he saying? Different paths to heaven? No. 385, abrogated 262. So, you don't agree with this? Well, Major Hassan used this as a reason why he was going to kill people. By the way, if he did use it for a reason to kill people, and he was a regular member of like the Dar al-Hijra Mosque, okay, and he was in constant contact with al-Waqi. You know, we know that even if you could prove this abrogation was wrong, it's still part of the doctrine of those people killing us. So, if you feel like I'm a broken record here, that's right, because we are this record keeps coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. So, because this is true, whoever seeks a religion under Islam will never have it accepted of him. We have the verse of the surah of the sword and the verse of the sword. Quran verse 9:5. Fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, and lie in wait for them in every strategy of war. Okay? I actually had someone very senior say, Steve, what do you think that means? And I said, well, sir, I think it means fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, to mean wherever they are. And that you were supposed to lie in wait for them in every strategy of war, including the strategies of war that are used to defeat them. So this verse is understood to apply to people who are not of the book. After they cleared out the desert, the Arabian desert of the pagans, it's the term they translated into, the only people left who were not converted were the Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians. So, 9:29. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his apostle, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are people of the book, even if they are Christians and Jews, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Okay, this is where the law of dimitude comes in. You can surrender to the law and the will of Islam. So, what did Major Hassan say? He actually beat me because he actually brought some hadith in. Muslim, verse 153, someone went up to Muhammad and said, Muhammad, do you know how Allah revealed that you must fight them until they testify there is no God but God? Does that mean have a robust debate? And Muhammad retorted, by the way, this is also in Bukhari. No, Muhammad said, I have been commanded to fight people until they testify there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. And Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So here we have it. Okay. Then he went on and quoted verse 905, just like I did. And then he went on and quoted verse 44. If you see, slide 42, 43, 44. So, for those who find this difficult, let's make this very easy. Allah said, you must fight them until they testify there is no God but God. Muhammad said, I have been commanded to fight them until they testify that there is no God but God. So, all Muslims are required to emulate the life of the Prophet. So all Muslims are required to fight them until they testify there is no God but God, until the entire world has been made to Dar al-Islam. Now, if you want to disagree with that, go for it. But show in Islamic law, real Islamic law, where you can source that. Because by God, I can get Al-Qaeda. I could get sources from Al-Qaeda that are authoritative, that for every one you produce, I can produce 500. And for every semi-authoritative one you can produce, because you're not going to produce an authoritative one, I can produce 100 authoritative ones. Okay? They are not where they are because in the Muslim world because their arguments are completely bogus. Whether they are too extreme, that's another issue. Extreme by what criteria? Not by Western criteria, but by the criteria of the Salaf. It's their criteria that they either are or are not extreme. And they wander back in and out on that. So, here we have American Al-Qaeda spokesman Lodz Fort Hood. This is al-Waqi, I do believe, saying that all U.S. military officers should do that. Now, am I saying that I think militant Muslims who are in the U.S. military are all jihadis waiting to explode? No, I don't think that. I don't think that. Have never briefed it. Have never thought it. Do I think that we have to, in any event, still account for this language and its effect on the doctrine? Well, not only do we have to, we have seen this take its effect. So it's real. And pretending it's not real is getting people killed. Okay? Now, given that there were people, I'm told, who complained about these briefings, and they were told to shut up, we need to account for the fact that warning was provided. Warning was provided. All the evidence that was needed already existed. So, here we have it. Major Hassan's briefing. Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, suicide bombers, Iran. If Muslim groups can convince Muslims that they are fighting for God against injustices of the infidels, i.e. enemies of Islam, here's a man in a U.S. Army uniform describing his own military as an enemy of Islam. If you don't believe that, remember he shot them. Okay? And it seems like you have to wait for people to get shot to act. Then Muslims can become a potent adversary, i.e. suicide bombing, etc. And then we have this. What is the singular of we? I love death more than you love life. Well, that's basically the jihad war cry. That's basically calling out that you are committing to jihad. Now we're going to watch a whole bunch of people say, Steve, that's not actually necessarily true. You know, we had a whole bunch of sociologists get together and say, you're supposed to come up with a reason why that's not true. And so long as you come up with a reason that it's not true and it makes sense, we're going to adopt it. Okay? Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. That's a declaration. Would you agree? Yes. And it's commonly understood. So, he actually declared his hostility openly. So, we can't say he conspired. In a certain sense, he obeyed all the rules. Okay? So he can't be called a spy. And he's not just an insane murderer. Whatever else he is, he's a committed warrior for what he believed. I mean, I don't glorify kamikaze pilots, but I recognize that they fought their mission and they believed in it. Okay? I don't have to like what their cause was. So here we have it. Could Major Hassan been any clearer in his briefing? And let me make this clear. If we had done the due diligence of just simply making a decision to understand the stated threat doctrine of the self-identified enemy, wouldn't we have known this? Don't you think that the enemy in the war on terror is running the field on us? Having convinced us that we cannot know which could easily be known? So, here's his conclusion. God expects full loyalty, promises heaven, and threatens hell. Muslims may be seen as moderate, and there are certainly many Muslims who are moderate, but Allah is not. He has in quotes, I love the Quran and being a Muslim, but I don't want to live under Islamic rule. He has it in quotes. Why? Because that's a contradiction in terms. Okay? It's a contradiction. Are there Muslims who don't want to live under Islamic rule? You bet they are. What might they be? They might be apostate Muslims. Have you ever thought to think about maybe a moderate Egyptian is an apostate Muslim? Now, as you jump up and down and protest that I said that, just wait a year in Egypt and we'll see. Well, why don't we just go take a look at Libya today? Okay? It's not exactly as if we can't demonstrate an actual application of what's being said here. Fighting to establish an Islamic State to please God, even if by force is condoned by Islam. Muslim soldiers should not serve in any capacity that renders them at risk to hurting, killing believers unjustly. So, what is he calling for? An exemption from Muslims for fighting in the U.S. military if the U.S. military is ever fighting fellow Muslims. Okay? Well, where would we have been in World War II? Where the largest ethnic group of Americans were German Americans. Okay? Think about that. So, here's his recommendation. How many people think this sounds like a threat? And if you don't think it sounds like a threat, I'm good with that. I mean, usually half the people raise their hand and half the people don't. Recommendation. The Department of Defense should allow Muslim soldiers the options of being released as conscientious objectors to increase troop morale and decrease adverse events. Does that sound like a threat? Or is it kind of like the, oh, okay. Or does it, maybe the President Clinton thing, it's all about what the word is. It's all about what the meaning of adverse events are. But in theory, adverse events could be something so minimal as to not be a threat, or it could be defined in such a way that it is a clear threat. And lucky for us, slide 13 told us what adverse events were. Adverse events are killing your fellow soldiers and engaging in espionage. So, Department of Defense should allow Muslim soldiers the option of being released as conscientious objectors to increase troop morale and decrease adverse events. Is that a threat now? It's an actual threat. Now, I will tell you something. I was with a group of people, and we were watching TV. It might have been Al Jazeera, one nice summer day, and we saw this two different, I think it was two soldiers. I will leave their name out of it. I'll stay non-attribution here, except for the one who was arrested, Abdo, okay? Saw them both in pressed ACUs, I think one at Fort Campbell, one at Fort Hood, on, I think, Al Jazeera TV, saying that they demanded to be released as conscientious objectors. And I, but more importantly, some other people, reported that inside the U.S. military system and said, hey, you better watch out. He used the words that we have associated with Major Hassan, okay? Clear term of art that they seem to follow. And the person in question was ridiculed and called a hater. I'd like to point out that, about 8 months ago, Specialist Abdo was arrested, not because the FBI had a sting operation on him, not because Fort Hood was undergoing any type of personal security or TARP training. It was because a gun dealer saw him buying weapons he thought was peculiar and called the local police, who I'm told arrested him in his hotel as he was manufacturing the bombs to go back onto Fort Hood and do something again. Warning, actual warning was given, and it was ignored. Okay, I will tell you, political correctness cannot be allowed to supersede the constitutional oath to support and defend the Constitution. And when it does, there's something wrong. And other people are dying for it. Because this was briefed inside national security circles for years prior to Fort Hood, doesn't it create some level of guilty knowledge? Culpable negligence even? So what are the indicators in the early phases? What I'm going to do is I'm going to break here because this is kind of a new ad from when we gave the brief. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the timeline. But it's a part of the U.S. legal system that can touch them whether they ever heard of it. Okay? I don't have to prove that. I don't have to go up to Private Snuffy Smith and say, Private Snuffy Smith, what article of the Constitution caused you to join the Army? He might look at me and say, what are you talking about? But guess what? PFC Snuffy Smith, or Sergeant Snuffy Smith, he exists in that uniform because the Constitution created that reality, and he will fight for it whether he ever read it. In the same instance, I don't have to prove that this is ubiquitously known in the Muslim population. I just have to prove that it's doctrine. And all I have to do from that point is show that it is the baseline on which the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and every other radical group orients their strategic thinking on. And I will prove that as a matter of fact. In fact, even if you could prove abrogation was wrong, I could still prove that they think it's true and they orient on it. So not knowing this is malpractice. So as you go and talk to your cultural experts and moderates and say, oh, we don't believe in that, and you shouldn't listen to it, just come to us and we'll tell you what you're allowed to know. And I'll argue, well, this is what they believe. I'm going to tell you, you got to make a choice. One's true or the other's true. And one's true. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to discuss this issue of abrogation. Now a little bit of background on abrogation. I think, and I have been briefing this since maybe 2005, that it's the most important concept in Islamic law to get one's hands around from the perspective of analyzing groups like Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? Why? because this is to the exclusion of the other. Now, as you decide which side you're going to come down on, all I'm going to ask is, on what factual basis are you making that decision? On what professional basis are you going to come down one way or the other? Okay? Because I will argue the facts only cut one way. In fact, in the entire war on terror, they've always only cut one way. Okay? So, does abrogation exist? Well, let's just take a look at it. People will say, this is Steve Coughlin's interpretation of Islam. As you've seen so far, if it's an element of Islam, I never say it, I read it. And I read it out of an authoritative book, a source that's authoritative. Okay? So, let's take a look at Islamic jurisprudence, written by Imran Hassan Khan Naizi, a different book. Abrogation defined. What does he say? The law was laid down in the period of the Prophet, gradually and in stages. The aim was to bring a society steeped in morality to observe the highest standards of morality. This could not be done abruptly. It was done in stages, and doing so necessitated repeal and abrogation of certain laws. So, what is he saying? Who laid down the law in the period of the Prophet? Who was it? Who did it? Allah, when he revealed his word. And how did he do it? Gradually and in stages. In fact, what, a 22-year period of time? Okay? So, what's it saying the next? Steeped in morality? I think that the Muslim Brotherhood would fairly say the Arabs were so immoral at the time, in a complete state of jahiliyyah, that Allah decided to bring them along slowly. Didn't want to create shock. So it was done slowly. It was done in stages. So what would happen is, when the message got to a certain stage and the population was ready, the message could be changed to the higher message because they were ready for it. But the second they went to that higher mission, they then could repeal and abrogate the earlier law. Okay? And they would keep progressively doing that until they came to the end state of Islam over the 22-year period. So, what is abrogation saying? Abrogation is saying that the things that were revealed last in the Quran chronologically overrule or control the things that were said earlier. So, here you have it. You have your moderate friend, and he says, the roadmap they use. The roadmap they use, is based on this concept of abrogation. So, I would like to point out that I've been briefing this since 2005. I think it was 2007, I was banned from briefing it at a national counterterrorism briefing, to which former head of the CIA came out and publicly said that was an outrage. Okay? I think it was 2008 maybe. Okay? But why do I want to point this out? Because if you understand the nexus between Muslim Brotherhood ideology and the Islamic law of abrogation, you can predict what they're going to do. And we have been doing it over and over and over again. We have nothing that we've had to reclama. We've had nothing we've had to take back. And by the time we get done with this discussion of abrogation, you will understand that choosing not to know this so as not to offend other people, and branding this, what was the word? Warped, okay, has caused Americans to die in America, okay? I think not knowing this is malpractice. Now, you will hear people say, oh, those guys are talking about this Islamic concept of abrogation, and of course most Muslims don't even know about it. Guess what? Most Americans don't know res ipsa loquitur.